And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers for our opening session, Addressability Beyond the Cookie with Eliza Nevers, Senior Vice President of Product at Lotame, and Brenda Tuig, Vice President of Data Partnerships at the Trade Desk. We'll first hear from Eliza. She gives us a breakdown of some of the alternatives to the third-party cookie, and then she'll be joined by Brenda for a deeper dive discussion. Eliza, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you again, Kristen. I'm Eliza Nevers. I lead product here at Lotame. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, addressability and addressability in the future. In my 15 plus years in online advertising, there has never been a time with so much uncertainty and so much change. Privacy regulations and now technical restrictions are changing how we operate. Let's dig in a bit on how we got here. I think one of the main root causes is data mishandling. There are concerns with how we as an industry collect, share, and use data. Cookies have allowed us to pass consumer data easily from one company to the next, often without the consent of the user, and sometimes without even the site where the data was collected being aware either. These practices have led consumers to take notice. Consumers and advocacy groups started to investigate, and although many of us in the ecosystem truly believe in an improved user experience, this scrutiny brought to light some practices that need to change. The increased consumer interest has led us to privacy regulations and now technical restrictions by browsers and mobile operating systems. While these changes have had some positive impact, they have also created many challenges. Most importantly, the vehicles used to connect data between media owners and marketers, and really everyone in between, are being removed. Your ability to reach consumers, run digital campaigns, effectively measure ad spend are at risk. In addition, some of these changes are also enabling the walled gardens to build their walls even higher, which negatively impacts smaller independent companies. All of this disruption we're facing is hamstringing the advertising community. No one is immune to these changes. The big questions we're all asking are, how do we solve for the current limitations of third-party tracking in a way that creates growth and value? How can we do it in a privacy-compliant way? How can we do it without relying on the trillion-dollar companies and walled gardens to make these decisions for us? Can we still keep the web open and transparent? Marketers, can you still rely on ad targeting, frequency capping, personalization, and cross-channel deployment as we once knew it? We faced similar challenges in the past and have come out better as an industry and better for consumers. As this has happened in the past, this disruption is leading to innovation. There are hundreds of companies trying to solve our new data connectivity challenge. While there may be a period of testing and figuring out which solutions will drive the performance and scale needed to stand the test of time, I am confident that we as an industry will develop better solutions that are more consumer-friendly and really more effective than just putting everything in a third-party cookie. Preserving the open web has real monetary impact on advertisers and media owners in the digital advertising. IAB research concluded that in the absence of a tracking alternative to the third-party cookie, $32 to $39 billion in ad spend could shift to the walled gardens. As I mentioned earlier, the walls keep getting higher and the triopoly keeps getting richer, at the great expense of publishers of all sizes and marketers who become limited in their choice of where to reach consumers effectively. Preserving the open web is just smart business. How can we give you marketers effective privacy-safe options to reach consumers outside of the walled gardens and avoid shifting more than $30 billion of ad spend from the open web to the walled gardens? And what do marketers think of all this change? Lotame conducted its own research in February of this year to understand how marketers and media owners were preparing for a post-cookie world. Identity is on everyone's mind, marketers and publishers alike. Google has it, so do Facebook, Apple, and Amazon. Should these four have a total lock on identity? Marketers and publishers don't think so, as their plans reveal. 75% of marketers and publishers either have or plan to use an identity graph solution in the next 6 to 12 months. In fact, marketers cite identity as the top must-have investment for a post-cookie world. In addition, they would like to see more time, money, and resources invested in a post-cookie world in the following areas. 51% want to improve analysis. 43% are seeking greater data science and modeling investment. And 40% are looking to define more relevant audience segments. When it comes to identity, 3 in 5 marketers agree that identity solutions must be interoperable, which is why we believe identity is a team sport and multiple interoperable identity solutions will be needed to preserve the open web. Let's take a look at some of these different identity solutions and how they work together. These multiple interoperable identity solutions give marketers choices to move consumers through the funnel. Each solution has its unique strength across the customer journey. Broad awareness is where contextual and Flock will provide wide reach and scale. And as consumers move down the consideration phase, machine learning-based probabilistic identity solutions and layering on relevant publisher first-party data can help you do more targeted prospecting and find users who are likely to consider your offering. And deterministic identity and Fledge-like retargeting solutions help convert consumers at the bottom of the funnel and support loyalty and return purchases. It is key that these solutions work together to drive value and performance for all. When evaluating identity solutions, here are some of the other considerations we at Lotame are looking at. Number 1, resolution. Does it resolve to a device, a person, or a broader based cohort? Number 2, algorithm. Is it a deterministic ID? Is it a probabilistic ID? Or is it a combination of both? What are the commercials for this identity solution? Is there an additional tax or is it free for all to transact on? What are your global needs and does it have the coverage in the regions in which you operate? Consumer consent. How is consumer consent handled? If a consumer chooses to opt out, is this propagated or is this siloed to the device in which they opted out? Data. Is this an enriched identity solution? Meaning, does this ID have data appended to it, or is it just an ID on its own? And finally, is this solution interoperable with other identity solutions? These are all key considerations for you as marketers and agencies to consider as you look towards identity solutions for the future. Many of you have already heard from our team about the Panorama ID. Launched in 2020, Panorama is Lotame's solution to continue to connect data across the ecosystem. We've built this solution for the purpose of data connectivity, period. It is a global, people-based, privacy-compliant identity solution for the open web, built from multiple signals, whether it be web, mobile, CTV, or customer-specific IDs. It is freely accessible to and interoperable across the cookie-challenged web, all domains, devices, and platforms globally. Panorama ID leverages our unique position in the marketplace, serving and working across all players in the ad tech ecosystem. We are actively integrating and testing with many providers and media owners today. Later in this session, you will get a look at some of the positive results we are seeing from these tests. Again, our key goal is data connectivity, and one of our core tenets is interoperability. In the spirit of interoperability, I'd like to introduce Brenda Tuig, who is the Senior Vice President of Data Partnerships at the Trade Desk. I've spoken to you all about Lotame's vision for the connected future. And in this second half, we are going to discuss many of these challenges with Brenda and hear her perspective on solutions for a world without third-party cookies. I'm going to, hi, Brenda. Now I can see Brenda on my screen and I'm not just presenting to all of you. As I said, I've spent time talking about the Panorama ID and Lotame's perspective and our machine learning based solution. I very much view our solution as a complementary solution to some of the authenticated IDs. And I know that Trade Desk has been helping to lead the charge with UID 2.0. I was hoping that we could start this conversation with an overview of UID 2.0. How does it work? What does it solve? And hear from you directly.
Great, thank you. And thank you for having me here today. Really enjoyed your remarks a minute ago. I think super aligned with how we at the Trade Desk view the ecosystem and view the evolution also. So thank you for having me here. And I'd love to tell you a little bit more, and the audience a little bit more about Unified ID 2.0. So first and foremost, the way that we're positioning, that we think about UID2 is it is similar to Panorama ID in that it is open sourced, very important tenet of the identity solution. It's industry-wide, and it's really also designed to help preserve relevant targeting in the open internet. And so that is the core tenet, the core fabric underneath. And so what is it underneath the hood? What does that mean? What UID2 is providing a standard approach for encrypting and hashing email that everybody can adopt so that there is a common currency created that everyone can transact upon for advertising in the open internet. And I think this new framework really elevates the experience beyond what the third-party cookie offers today. So it's really a positive step forward for the industry, and it elevates it in a couple ways. First and foremost, for the consumer. So it provides more transparency and control for them, giving them a portal to manage their preferences, and also providing standardized language for publishers to be able to explain the value exchange to consumers when they're opting in to UID2. And then secondly, it's super secure. So the double encryption and hashing of emails really helps protect the privacy of that personal identifiable information. And then one of the most, I think, exciting features about it is that unlike the cookie today, it is cross-platform. So the UID2 is available and operates seamlessly across the web, connected TV, and importantly, mobile apps. So those are some of the benefits. I think it really upgrades where we are with the cookie. But one thing I do want to stress in this is that while I am here representing Trade Desk, UID2, I'm happy to talk about UID2. It's not actually a UID, it's not actually a Trade Desk product. What it is something that the Trade Desk initiated because of our belief in the open internet and keeping the open internet ecosystem vibrant. So we initially designed and created the tech, but at this point, it's a live open source technology that's being administered by a third party. And I think that open source, really free service that's being administered independently is why it's seen so much adoption across other DSPs, SSPs, pubs, data companies, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, the free aspect to it, like you said, the open source and enabling everybody to use it without, without that additional tax, I think is really key. So
right.
As you know, so much of our audience here today are agencies, marketers, and so forth. And clearly, there are numerous solutions to the deprecation of third-party cookies. I think, at last count, there are those slides that have 40 different IDs. Everyone's announcing their new ID or new contextual solution or a new cohort solution. Lots of buzzwords that we love to put on in this industry. Frankly, to me, it's overwhelming, and I live and breathe this every single day. How should agencies be educating themselves and preparing for the deprecation of third-party cookies right now? I mean, even though it's not here yet, what should they be doing right now?
Yeah, great question. And I agree with you. It's confusing, and you can read articles that contradict each other every day about what's going on, and everything sometimes sounds the same or completely contradictory. So I'm with you. Yeah, and I do have some thoughts about what advertisers and agencies should be thinking about today. But first and foremost, I don't believe there really is going to be one identity. Just like you said, that team sport, we're in the same boat. We believe that there won't be a single winner that rules them all. So a portfolio approach is highly, highly recommended, which essentially means work with multiple providers. And the keys about a unified ID too, like Panorama ID, is that it's interoperable. And so that means agencies and advertisers don't need to abandon their current identity solutions today or likely in the future, as long as those solutions evolve and become interoperable with the new ID spaces. But in terms of thinking about strategies that agencies and advertisers, I think, should start thinking about today, is that actually UID2 is live. And so I would say don't wait, get started, start testing the pipes. The scale's just starting. It's a fairly new product, but it's getting up and going, and we're seeing tremendous adoption already. So it makes a lot of sense to start testing UID2 and the other IDs that are emerging in the ecosystem to really see how that's going to work for you and your business. And importantly, don't expect a single silver bullet's going to solve it all. So really do test multiple solutions and start testing now. Another piece of advice or suggestion is something that we're all hearing a lot about, I believe, which is first-party data is key. And so we hear that a lot, and I can't emphasize that enough. Where a brand or an agency has an opportunity to have that authenticated relationship with their own consumers, that's going to go a long way, especially as the industry evolves here. And then my last suggestion is something that agencies and advertisers can do right now is really talk to the pubs where you advertise, and make sure that they too are leaning into these new identity solutions so that everybody's ready for next year, and that they're also testing and scaling their adoption of these new identity sources.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I mean, it definitely is everybody really has to work together to go through this. Sort of a follow-up on that, we have a mix of agencies here today, small, mid-sized, some very large holding companies. Well, how do you see any of these strategies differing between small and large agencies?
Yeah, I would say, when I think about that question, I don't think the size really matters, no pun intended, right, on this one. I think really it doesn't change the recommendations I just gave, which is to get started, start with a portfolio approach, start testing everything. I do think first-party data may or may not be accessible to certain brands and agencies, and so that's going to require really leaning in with your various technology partners to understand what's on the horizon, how to lean into those various solutions. But getting started, some of you may have seen, there was an announcement that we made with Publicis where they've taken, so as a large agency, taken their core ID and made it interoperable with UID2. We really encourage and support all the agencies to start thinking about that. That's not just limited to a large agency, that kind of interoperability.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. So this is a much trickier question. One of the areas that Lotame has been focusing on is the need to complement authenticated solutions. I think the latest prediction I've read is that approximately 20% of the inventory will be authenticated. This means that 80% of the inventory that we know today will not be addressable with authenticated IDs. I know that Trade Desk has been vocal about marketers taking a portfolio approach to identity, as we've just said and we've talked about, but what are your suggestions for reaching consumers on the rest of the web, not just the users you know about and the users that you have an authenticated ID that are part of your first party, but what are your suggestions to sort of extend that reach to the rest of the web?
Yes, such a good question. So many ways I can go with this one, but I think
15 minutes on this alone.
I know, right? Yeah, for sure. So I think first and foremost, I sort of question that 20%. I'm not saying it won't be less, but that 20% sort of a number everyone's attaching themselves to. And I think there's so much unknown, but certainly it will be less. And so that would kind of be the first thing. Is it sounds really scary, but I do think there's a lot underway across the ecosystem to help address the second part of that, which is what is that unauthenticated portion? And I think, I mean, you hit it on the head, which is, I believe, and I mentioned this a minute ago, I believe the larger, highest quality publishers we've seen started or leaning into these identity solutions. So we're feeling very confident about that. And the more this ecosystem really has the influence, and they do, to help encourage the pubs to lean into that, the more scale that will continue to evolve into authenticated. So that's really on the ID space. I think the portfolio of identity solutions also, though, applies to a portfolio of advertising solutions. And so targeting remains viable and will continue, but it'll probably look a little bit different. So it'll probably have more machine learning applied, good old fashioned lookalike modeling with additional sophistication applied to it will persist. We've heard a lot about context having a resurgence. And so at the Trade Desk, we're focused on really making sure that our solution is ready to go for everything that is sort of on the horizon, and we're building our own tech to make sure that we're ready and prepared to help our advertisers.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I feel that, I've preached this quite a bit internally. It's like there's so many different solutions. We don't want to just provide one for our partners. Even internally, we want to be able to, even as just Lotame, we want to be able to provide multiple different ways, whether it be first party aggregated or panorama ID in our probabilistic solution.
And it doesn't need to be an either or, right? It's like it really should be testing all.
Exactly. I mean, I think now it's like we've learned so much in the testing period. I feel like if we fast forward 6 months from now, what have we learned? It's going to be a very interesting to see, and like what provides the scale and the performance and really does with that solution. So if we look, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't mention some of the other, some of the walled gardens and talked a little bit about them. But, recent changes by Google and Apple seem to really be building their walls even higher. We both, I think both Lotame and Trade Desk have been pretty outspoken about preserving the open web. Why is this important to you at Trade Desk, and how should agencies and marketers be rallying around this call?
Such an important topic
for them.
Such an important topic, and the statistics you shared can be startling, right? And so it is important, but I would say at its core, what Trade Desk has been founded on has for the last 11 years been on a mission to do, is to make advertising across the internet better for consumers, advertisers, and publishers. And better can include performance, better can include privacy. And so really, truly better. And so that's why Trade Desk took the position to invest in an open sourced identity fabric for the internet that we handed over, because we truly do believe in the health of the open internet, and the ecosystem is so important to make sure that there's a fair market and optionality for advertisers and publishers. And I believe one of the reasons that we have seen the lean in and support for the identity solution that we initiated and that's available now is that the benefits are clear for all participants. And so this is how I would encourage the attendees on this call to think about speaking about it when they're thinking about it when they're talking about it. So first and foremost, for consumers, right, which is the important constituent here, truly, the industry really has done a poor job historically in describing the value exchange of why give data and what you get for it. And so I think that just needs to be made clear. And I think that where we're headed as an industry, it's going to become more clear. Consumers will retain free access to high quality inventory with improved transparency and control. And so that's what we're all striving for. Yeah. The other stakeholder being publishers, we want to help make sure that we have great quality content and that it can be supported and funded by advertising. And so that's another key variable. So we want to make sure that, and that's what some of these new ID spaces help ensure and enable, is that we still get that great free content that we all rely on. And then lastly, for the advertisers, obviously being able to continue to target and measure advertising is important, to want to continue to invest in certain areas. but also it gives our advertisers, I mentioned a minute ago, the ability to still continue to leverage their first party data where they have it, their CRM data in the open internet and the ecosystem. So again, really clear benefits for consumers, publishers, and advertisers with the new ID spaces that are coming out. And so that's, that's where how we're viewing it.
Yeah, I think I said this a little bit in my introductory. I think we've used a third-party cookie as a crutch, to do everything. And it's like, and when you look forward, I definitely feel that the identity some of the new solutions that are being tested, that are being built, that are better, than the third-party cookie.
Absolutely.
You mentioned it in one of your responses that, it's cross-platform. Like the UID is cross-platform across it, and it's not just based on the web inventory and mobile web. How else do you think these new solutions are superior to the third-party cookie and what we've used historically to do measurement and attribution and targeting?
Yeah, I mean, I think I spoke to it a minute ago, but I think, like you said, cross-platform is certainly one. The secure, so really protecting that privacy through a double, and in the case of UID2 at least, a double encryption and hash is secure. And then lastly, really, and most importantly, is the consumer's access to choice, consent, authentication, and really truly understanding that value exchange that's happening. Whereas the, that hasn't really been as prevalent historically.
Well, it was sort of done without the user aware. And now it's like,
Yeah.
This is why we're doing it. Like, you want this content, we need this value exchange. I would say the other thing that, from my perspective, I've worked a lot on the publisher side in my past as well. And it's, there is quite a bit of, with the use of third-party cookies, with data leakage, that I know this is much more of an agency session, but it allows publishers a little bit more security to control where their data and where their consumers' information, their users' information is gone and shared and so forth. So
yeah, absolutely, that's a really good point, for sure. I agree that these solutions do. There are other solutions being proposed that maybe are a little bit less that way. So yeah. There's a mix out there.
Yeah, so that's a great lead into my next question. To flock or not to flock. This is a tough.
You picked up on my hint there, I think.
Exactly. This is a tough one for me because I strongly believe that we need solutions outside of Google. We need solutions outside of Facebook and some of the other large companies that are dominating our ecosystem. And we need to fight for the small publishers, to preserve that free and open web. But, and more importantly, as importantly, I should say, we need to enable innovation in MarTech and in ad tech with lots of startups and new ideas, and not just have all the money flow through the larger companies.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on browser-based cohorts, and what is your advice to marketers in the audience on how they should be considering Flock? Because it's an easy solution in some ways, right?
I would say,
marketing there.
Yeah, so the way I view Flocks, and I think we, the Trade Desk, view it, is it's absolutely a solution that should be considered and tested. There's a lot of potential for the idea of cohort-based targeting. Cohort-based targeting is a tactic that certainly makes sense on the surface, I think. And so I 100% believe, use that in your portfolio that we've been talking about here, use that as one of the things you're testing, but it shouldn't be the only. And so there's no reason for it to be an either all Flock or not Flock. It's like one of your tactics. But I think many of us who follow the trade press have seen there's been a lot of healthy debate around Flock and how privacy safe truly is it, because it doesn't really offer that notice and choice as much for consumers. So it's not really advancing that conversation as much. It's tied to a specific browser, not multiple browser. And we've seen it hit some privacy speed bumps, and especially in EMEA with GDPR. So I think that, combined with, it's still a little bit of an open question, how well will it perform? And with everything, it's very new. And I think it's important to obviously look at it and test it, but I would recommend not going all in on it only. I would say definitely look at the other solutions too in your portfolio.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the things that I've read, and in talking to a number of people too, that a browser, I guess I wouldn't even say a consumer, it's a browser, will only be in one flock at a time. And so like that's interesting to me, because I think from the marketer's perspective, it's what is this flock? Like how do you, are you just sort of, I mean, I think there's a lot of machine learning to understand what flock performs for your campaigns, what flock performs for what, as opposed to saying, oh, I want to reach auto intenders, or, so it's very interesting, I think, in terms of only being able to be part of one flock and being browser based. So I look forward to seeing how this all shakes out, and how that is brought to life. So to move on, we'll move past Google. We'll move on to something
Sure,
else.
I could talk about Google all day.
all day long. So, but both Lotame, the Panorama ID and UID, our identity solutions are free of charge to the end user, and we've talked about this, and it's really important to us, in that it is not just one more tax that from the dollars from the publisher. I mean, from the marketer to the publisher. How should agencies, especially those with less resources, be weighing these solutions that are taxed versus free, and thinking about that when they're looking at their choices?
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting dynamic that's emerging with some free solutions coming into the market. I think the reason for that is really to help propel and keep the industry healthy. So it shouldn't be seen as free as less valuable or less good. I think it is something to weigh and consider. But as the DSP ourselves, we're going to work with all of the IDs that come into the ecosystem, and we're really going to let the market choose and decide which IDs are the ones that are showing up in the bid stream and that need to be paid attention to. And that's how we're approaching it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that makes sense. Okay, so I think we have time for just one last question. So my final question.
That went fast, by the way.
I know, seriously. It's fast when you're sitting in your own home office by yourself, right? One of the main drivers of the deprecation of third-party cookies is to support consumer privacy and choice, as we've talked about. I've heard many describe this period as a disruption, as our time to rebuild and do things better. Is this a moment for us to fundamentally think about how we do data-driven advertising differently? And like, where do you see us 2 to 3 years from now, based on some of this innovation?
Yeah, great question. And I think a good question to wrap on. So I would just like to clarify and state my point, if it didn't come across clearly enough, that I don't believe data-driven advertising is going anywhere. I think it's going to continue to evolve and iterate. But ultimately, at the end of the day, aside from a few paid for publisher sites, the pub in the open internet ecosystem and good content is funded by advertising. And that's going to continue. And we want to make sure, and we're seeing already new innovation around how to make sure that relevant advertising persists to help support that open ecosystem. I think, like I said a minute ago, we've just done a poor job describing that value exchange to consumers. And I think this is giving us an opportunity to really recreate that conversation with consumers. And so I see this moment in time is truly transformational for the industry in a very positive direction. It might cause a little bit of heartburn and twists and turns along the way, but I think at the end of the day, all of us working together really have an opportunity to pioneer a new approach to the internet and the open ecosystem, and help consumers have choice and help relevant advertising continue.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Brenda, for joining us today and weighing in on this. I think that, I think it's exciting. I think it's a very exciting time. Like you said, we're pioneering a new way. And I think many of us, the attendees here in the audience, and many of the players in the ad tech ecosystem really need to bond together and push this forward together, with our publisher partners, obviously, because they're going to be a huge part to the solution. Because they're the ones who are obviously going to be needing to convey this to the, convey the value exchange to the consumers. So
that's absolutely correct. Yeah, no, and thank you again for having me here today. It was great to have this conversation.